Hello and welcome to the program. This is Keith David Henry, and you're listening to the Progressions of Consciousness radio broadcast. We are on the Community Listening Network. The web address there is www.clnradio.com. In the last several broadcasts, we've been dealing with the subject of the nature of perception, and we've spent quite a bit of time on that because the information in those broadcasts is going to be a foundation for the things we're going to begin to talk about. Now, this program is going to be dedicated to the idea of the fallacy of separation. The fallacy of separation. And one of the reasons I spend so much time talking about religion, and I spend so much time talking about government, is that a lot of these, tenets of thought are designed to foster a paradigm of separation. And Christianity is, paramount in that regard, because it deals with it on the ultimate level by saying that you have God, the creator of the universe, the omnipotent, omniscient one that needs no information, that doesn't need to grow, that needs nothing, is everywhere all at the same time, that somehow booted us out of favor with him, that he cut us off, cut our visas in half, bad boy, threw us out of the Garden of Eden and left us to deal with this really slimy character called the devil. I mean, that's kind of severe. I've often said, even during my years as a practicing Christian, the idea that God would send me to hell, I could never reconcile that. And, I have two children, and I can't think of anything that they would do that would be so bad that I would want to light them on fire forever. Now, I can think of some times when I've done some pretty angry things, or I've gotten angry at some things that they've done, and I've looked at common things you see in the news, where people kill their parents, or they do really, really bad things, and maybe they warrant the electric chair or lethal injection, but the pain of that doesn't last forever. It's short-lived. And, under the tenets of government, it's fair punishment that fits a crime. You murder someone, you get killed. So, the idea of separation, the idea that God is over there or up there and we are down here, makes for a lot of warm, fuzzy feelings when you think, God was so merciful that he sent his only begotten Son. But he didn't just send him, you got to believe in him. Oh, there we go, there's the hitch. So in order to bridge that separation, you have to do what you're told. You can't be a unique individual. You have to do what you're told to do to regain that favor. But not only that, you have to do it by choice. So think about what is being said. God wants us by free will to worship him, yet if we don't worship him, he's going to send us to hell. Now, I challenge anyone to legitimately reconcile the idea of compliance based upon free will, based upon choice, when the punishment of hell is in the equation. You can't have it both ways. Well, God wants us to, to obey him and love him. That's sort of like, God is codependent, or what's the word? Passive aggressive. God is a codependent, passive aggressive fellow who also seems to be schizophrenic, because if he gets mad at you, he might hit you with a lightning bolt, but then he might send his son to die on the cross for you. I mean, so God is saying, well, you better obey me, I'm going to send you to hell, but you don't really have to. I mean, I want you to do it out of, free will. Well, that, to me, is a very insulting prospect about the creator of the universe. I am, on one sense, being tongue-in-cheek, but how many people really think about those things and really ask themselves from a reasonable perspective what kind of God they're serving? People take the things that they're taught from the Bible and other religions, and I'm most familiar with Christianity, and that's why I spend so much time on that rather than the other ones. But people take what they're taught and they don't question it, and they really have these ridiculous views, what I consider ridiculous, and I know I may be making some enemies using this kind of terminology, but to me it's quite ridiculous to think that God would treat his creation in that way. Well, the point of the matter is that what we've been taught religiously is designed to foster separation, number one. Number two, it's designed to make you, step to it and do what you're told. And there are certain concepts that have been injected into religion that cause us to be. And those concepts are the concepts of worship and the concepts of obedience. Worship is generally considered, not only an honorable concept, but is considered a spiritual concept. You're giving honor to God. You're worshiping God. You're bowing down before God. And you're telling God that he's better than you, as if he needs to be schmoozed. Why does such a mechanism exist? Well, you don't have to look very far to see that the leadership of these monotheistic points of view are riding on the coattails of that worship. So now, not only is God to be revered, but now the priest is to be revered. The reverend is to be revered. He's a reverend. Well, so am I. I'm just not preaching. We are all, and then you'll hear, well, we are all equal in the sight of God. But if we're equal in the sight of God, how come you're riding around in a Cadillac, living in a mansion, and I'm struggling to pay my bills? All right, now, I'm not going to say that, we should depend upon someone else to take care of us, but what I'm saying is, religion is one of the biggest money-making propositions that there is. And on top of it, in some sects of Christianity, you have the concept of the tithe, where you are to give 10% of your income. Well, that's not what the tithe is about. The tithe is supposed to be 10% of your increase. And income and increase are the same word, but this is one of the big objections I have to the federal income tax, because if you go to work for 40 hours and you get 40 hours of pay, that is not income. That's compensation. Income is when you take $100 and you put it in the stock market, and that stock grows and it's worth $1,000. Well, $900 of that money is income. And the federal income tax was never designed to be levied against compensation, but against income, against increase. And if you do a comprehensive study of the Bible, both Old and New Testament, about the tithe, it was mostly based on an Aquarian culture where you plant one seed and you get 1,000 back. So much of that is increase. So what's the idea? You create classes and separation. You have God, then you have the priest or the preacher or the reverend, and then you have the parishioner. Well, of course, you have God the Father, you have Jesus Christ, and then you have the preacher. Now, there's no conventional Christian thought that says that, from a standpoint of Protestantism, that says that the preacher or the priest is a means to get to God. But Catholicism says that straight out. But from a standpoint of Protestantism, if you don't do what the preacher says, you're going to go to hell too. And there's a whole list of things that if you don't do what you're told, you're out of favor with God, and you're going to get zapped. Judaism had over 600 ceremonial laws that you had to adhere to. And, these days we only pick on a few of them and we'll leave the rest of them alone because, we pick and choose the ones that we want. But the whole paradigm is one that you're absolutely responsible to be obedient to what you're being taught. Now, what is the value of that? The value is that there is a certain group of people that understands, and I call them the dark oligarchy, and they understand that if I can keep you in a paradigm of subservience, of worship, and of sacrifice, and of obedience that is punishable by hell or some other kind of, plague that God might send upon you, if we can keep people in this paradigm, then we can control them. So what's the value of controlling people? Well, partially, a big part of it is the money aspect, the wealth aspect, so that we become slaves to the system. And whether or not religion is principally a means of collecting money, there's no denying the role of religion in setting a mindset of obedience to people. Why do you think, how would you think that you could possibly get a person to pack up their grips, join the army and go kill people and be killed if there was not a paradigm of obedience involved and of subservience to God? If you couldn't get a person to believe that God wanted them to go and shoot the hell out of those people over there, then nobody would go. Now, a lot of this is based on patriotism, where, we're becoming soldiers and we're going to war and we're going to battle to protect our freedoms. And I'm not for 1 minute ever going to criticize anybody in the military that goes over and risks their lives over something that they genuinely believe. I hold these people in very high esteem. What I'm questioning is the purveyors of this fallacy of separation that is so severe that it finds us killing each other. For what? For what? Now, I'm not going to say that there was never a need for war in the world. You had the tribe and they're enjoying their meal, and all of a sudden this other tribe comes because winter is coming, and they want to take all their food that they've worked hard to get and steal it from them, leaving them with nothing. Well, you better fight. Because if you don't, they're going to take everything and you're going to die. But by and large, wars these days are not about protecting territory. defense contracts. Now, somebody said, well, you know, we had to go into Iraq. Well, why? Well, because they had weapons of mass destruction. Did they now? Well, where are they? Well, we made a mistake, but now we can't leave. For the most part, people kind of have in their mentality that we went into Iraq because of 9/11. But there's never been any connection between Saddam Hussein and 9/11. In fact, you know, the terrorists that were alleged to have taken over these 4 airplanes and attacked us were identified as Iranian, and Osama bin Laden was identified as the mastermind behind this and the subject of a massive manhunt. Yet, there's not a single charge by our government against bin Laden relegating any responsibility for 9/11 upon him. And somebody said, well, he claimed responsibility. There you go, watching the news again. Well, why didn't we just attack Iran? Why didn't we attack Iraq? You know, you're walking down the street, the guy comes up and he hits you over the head with a stick, and you turn to the guy on your left and smack him instead of the guy that hit you with the stick. Well, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But war seldom does. War seldom makes sense. Now, once again, one of the reasons I spent so much time dealing with the nature of perception is because of some of the things that I'm going to be talking about. And all the things I'm talking about are very, very well documented. But if you look at every major war in which this country participated, you look at World War I, World War II, the Korean War, Vietnam, all of these wars found the United States involved based on inaccurate information and sometimes lies. For instance, the Second World War. You know, you see the shows where, you know, the soldiers are out on the coast there and they're enjoying their day, and all of a sudden here come these Japanese Zeros dropping bombs, and it was a surprise attack. Well, it was a surprise attack because the information was withheld from the people that needed to have it. The Japanese gave us plenty of warning about what they intended to do, but the information was intentionally held back. And this is not my opinion. This is a matter of documented fact. And if you want the information, you know, things like this are so commonly known now. You know, yeah, I have the references on my site, but all you have to do is go to Google and do a Google search, and you'll come up with millions, tens of millions, perhaps hundreds of millions of hits on the subject. Not only that, but our administration at the time was doing everything conceivable to prod Japan into a fight. They weren't bothering us, we were bothering them. What did you expect? They were protecting themselves. So now all of a sudden they're the evil enemy, and we're the God-fearing people of God that must smite the enemy. And a lot of this paradigm came from the Old Testament perspective. Now, you know, I'll tell you what, if I got in a bind in my life, you know, the God that I want to be my God is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, because I'm telling you, that God could throw down, boy. I mean, he'd come and blow you up. You know, if you had a fort, he'd make the walls fall down. You know, if you didn't do what he told you to do, he'd send plagues. You know, I mean, this guy, I mean, he'd stop the sun and give you more time to fight. Stop the sun in the middle of the afternoon, let you keep fighting. I mean, that's what I want on my side, boy, I'll tell you. But what are these paradigms designed to do? They're designed to create an air of separation. We're separate from God. We're separate from our brothers and sisters. We're alone in the universe. We're individuals that must somehow make our own way in this world. That is far from the truth. That is far from the truth. The truth is, we are all one. Not just people that are of the same skin color and from the same country as I am. We're one human race that if we don't wake up and start realizing it and thinking in terms of unity and oneness, that we're going to kill each other off. Now, not everyone's going to be killed off. You know, don't believe for a second that there aren't people that have all kinds of contingency plans to protect and preserve the people that they think are important. But that's really beside the point, because we still are routinely subject to this idea of separation. Now, I talked about one of the programs, we were talking about the concepts of up and down and in and out and all of that. Well, in my books, I talk about something called the subjectivity experiment, and I talked about it in a couple of the shows, where it's unfortunate that the idea of subjectivity and relativity has been relegated to a concept of separation and opposition, so that it's common for us to hold or to believe that subjectivity is the same as separation, that because I'm an individual and I have my own way of looking at things, and because I'm here relatively and you're there relatively, that we are separate. One of the messages that particle physics is telling us with regard to the whole idea of the unified field and the whole idea of unlimited probability is, once again, that matter is not anything that is at all fixed or mass intensive. It seems that way strictly because of our perception of it. In one of the earlier programs, I was talking about how the eye captures information and essentially digitizes it or changes it into electrical signals that go into the back of our brain, and then we reason what that information is, and we come up with a conclusion about what that information is. Now, the way that whole process works, if you were just a brain sitting in a dark box, and I had sufficiently developed my technology where I could connect probes to that optic center, and connect those probes on the other end to a computer, a very complex computer, that was feeding you those electrical impulses without actually the benefit of having the process of, you know, the photons reflecting off the wall. If that program was feeding you a picture of a wall, you would have no way of knowing that you were connected to a computer and not seeing a wall, because all your brain is taking in is electrical signals. And if any of you have seen the movie The Matrix, which is probably my all-time favorite movie, you had these people that were just in this predicament where they were connected to a computer all their lives, but the artificial intelligence was so complex and so advanced and sophisticated that these people thought that they were walking around and eating and going to work, when all the time they were part of some computer program. Well, I'm not suggesting that there's a matrix to the degree that we saw in that movie, there is a matrix to the degree that our reality, the things that we think are real, are not at all what they appear to be. The things that we think are happening outside of us, the things that we ascribe distance and time to, none of that is happening outside of us. It's all happening in our brain. It's all happening internally. If you were to actually get a true picture of what was going on with our interaction of reality, what you would see is this soup of nothingness, a field of consciousness, of probability that we're all floating in as consciousness that is playing a movie in our head of reality. Now, that might seem like a bleak proposition to some people because they're thinking, well, what do you mean nothing is real? Well, real is a relative term. Real is a matter of perception and perspective. So, yes, things are real. I mean, if in this movie that we're projecting, you accidentally step out in the street and a car is right there and it hits you, you're going to die. Unless you've learned to master the mechanics of this illusion to avoid it, which is possible, you're going to die. But you have people, throughout history that have demonstrated through things like telekinesis and levitation, and even although people look at it as mythology, shape-shifting, firewalking, where not only do people walk on fire and are not burned, but there's no physical damage to them. So you have all these elements that seem to contradict or go against what we conceive as physical reality, when in true point of fact it is the concept or the paradigm of physical reality that is actually incorrect, or is actually inaccurate, or should I say our concept of it is inaccurate. That this physical matter is solid and real and substantial. Well, the reason this mechanism exists, once again, is so that we may participate in that experiment of subjectivity, not so that we can feel separate, not so that we can feel apart from God or apart from each other. In the area of particle physics, there are a lot of theories that are being advanced. Quantum theory is really, since the 1950s, has really been accepted as the direction to go in, and the path to take with regard to how physical reality really works. But to really understand quantum theory and string theory and membrane theory, you've got to look at the larger picture of where this really came from. And really, Albert Einstein, although he was in many ways a proponent, or an opponent rather, he was against a lot of the tenets of quantum theory. Ironically, he's pretty much the father of quantum theory because of the way he approached physics with his theories of relativity. And since the Einstein days, the thought has been that every major force is connected. Now, for this to make sense, we're going to do a little physics 101 here. I'm not going to get into the complex math, but there are essentially four forces that are recognized by science today. There is the electromagnetic force, there's the force of gravity, there's the subatomic weak force, and the subatomic strong force. And these are the four forces that are pretty much recognized across the board by science. And let's look at each one of them individually and see what they say. Now, the electromagnetic force is pretty self-explanatory because we're all familiar with electronics and we're all familiar with magnetism. The electromagnetic force dictates the way that electricity works. It dictates the way magnetism works, or let's say it explains its mathematical and scientific explanation of how these forces work, how negative and positive charges interact with each other. Now, you know, when we start talking about these experiments in physics and everything, you know, everybody says, well, you know, they're all theories, and, you know, how can anybody put so much weight in a theory? Well, electromagnetism is the best example of how somebody can do that, because every gadget that you have that uses electricity is based on a theory. Nobody really knows how it works, but our concept of electromagnetism is accurate enough to create, for instance, a computer. But it's still considered a theory. In fact, it was very interesting to me, having been involved in electronics, that when you look at a schematic of an electrical circuit, especially solid state, or particularly solid state electronics, they have the symbols that they use for semiconductor components, transistors, and, you know, all kinds of devices that, you know, manipulate the way electricity flows through a circuit and is the basis of modern computer technology. As I mentioned before in one of our programs, that we're in an age of crystal technology. And not only the components themselves, but every device that you have today, especially, you know, there's not a single kid alive today that is not aware of the internet, or was aware of a time when there wasn't the internet. But none of that would be possible without a quartz crystal. You know, not to mention the actual silicon and germanium crystalline material that comprises the semiconductor chips, you know, the computer chips, the memory and the processor and all that. This is crystal technology that we're talking about. But these symbols in the schematic are based on the theory that the flow of electricity is based on Hole flow, H-O-L-E flow. In other words, you have these atoms that have all of these electrons, and when the atoms interact with each other, the electrons are exchanged between the atoms. And you have a certain element of an atom called a valence shell, and the valence shell is the area of the atom that exchanges atoms with other atoms, for instance, to create molecules and to create the flow of electricity, among other things. So this valence area or valence shell of the electron determines how the electricity flows. So you have certain atoms, you know, according to the classic model of subatomic theory or atomic theory, you have certain atoms that have an overabundance of electrons in this valence shell, and they are considered positive. Then you have certain atoms that have an underabundance or deficiency of electrons in this valence shell, and the materials that are made of those types of atoms are called conductors. So that when you have an atom that has a deficiency, it wants to accept an electron from an atom that has an abundance of valence electrons. That's the current theory. But what used to be thought was that the electron, it was not the electron itself that flowed between atoms, but it was holes, or lacks, or the lack of electrons, the actual deficiency of electrons, that was the basis of current flow. So as a result of that, all of the symbols in the schematic are actually incorrect. They're pointing in the wrong direction because they're based on the theory of hole flow rather than electron flow. But no one has bothered to change those symbols because it still works. I find that extremely fascinating. The circuits still work even though all the symbols are backwards, and they were working from a different theory. So, but the point is, electromagnetism is one of the four forces, and electromagnetism had its own math, its own theories, its own theorems, and they were pretty much by themselves. Next you had the next force that is universally recognized is the force of gravity, and this is what Isaac Newton dealt with and tried to characterize, because Newton never really talked about how it worked. He never understood how it worked, or even professed to understand how it worked. What Newton did was he observed how it worked, and from that observation we were able to come up with a whole set of mathematics with which many advances were to be had, not the least of which is, space travel, the satellites. We have the Hubble telescope, and we have the moonshot, and we have the Voyager spacecraft landing on Mars. Well, all of this is based on Newtonian mathematics, or the Isaac Newton's idea of gravity. And again, it's a theory, but it's accurate enough for us to perform, what is tantamount to throwing a ball from here to California, throwing a golf ball from here to California, and having that golf ball land in the 9th hole of a certain golf course and stay there. I mean, that's how accurate this math is, and how conducive the theory is to practical application and the production of products and science. So we have electromagnetics and we have gravity, but the two forces that people may largely be unfamiliar with are the subatomic strong force and the subatomic weak force. Now, the strong force is defined as that force that causes things or constrains things, and the weak force is that force that is said to allow things. And I'll deal with the weak force first, because it's much simpler to talk about, because I want to give you an example of it. It's something called radioactive decay, which says that a certain material will pretty much bleed its radioactivity over a certain amount of time, and that bleeding of radioactivity is predictable and calculable. Well, the force that causes that bleeding, that causes that radioactive decay, is called the subatomic weak force. Now, the subatomic strong force is a little more fascinating, I think, because it really contradicts the theories and the mathematics of electromagnetics. For instance, you have, in the classic model of subatomic theory, you have a nucleus and you have electrons. The electrons revolve around the nucleus, and in the center of the nucleus you have protons and you have neutrons. Now, the electrons are negatively charged, the protons are positively charged, and the neutrons are neutral. Now, we know, for instance, according to electromagnetics, that similar charges, or like charges, repel each other. So positive, if you put positive and positive together, they don't want to be put together, they want to escape each other. If you put negative and negative together, they want to escape together, each other. But negative and positive attract. And you've heard the saying, well, opposites attract. So in the nucleus of this atom, you have these protons that are all positively charged, and according to electromagnetics, those protons should be repelling each other, and the atom should be flying off into space, and no matter should be able to exist, based on the theories of electromagnetics. Yet, there's material, which again, quantum physics is explaining to agree that although it's much more strange and outer limits like, at least it makes a little more sense than the current models or the older models, before the 50s, before quantum theory started picking up. So why aren't these protons flying out into space and the atom just blowing up? Well, that's what strong force does. Strong force is characterized as that force that holds the protons together in the center of the atom. Now, all four forces, as I said, had their own mathematics and their own theories, and none of these guys were really talking to each other. They all had their own little deals going on, until Einstein came along and says, hey, I'm going to unify electromagnetics and gravity. So I'm going to show that these two forces that have been considered separate by science forever are not separate at all, but that they're elements of one force, one dynamic that regulates everything. And it's commonly known as the theory of everything. Well, Einstein's the guy that started that. That's where quantum theory came from, and the great unification theory, where quantum theory finally was pretty much settled upon as a unification of all four forces of electromagnetism, of gravity, of the strong force and the weak force, and pretty much mathematically has been confirmed. Although in the beginning there was a lot of disagreement about it, right now it's pretty much agreed upon that quantum theory expresses or characterizes a single force that applies to all the four previous forces. Now, to get this to work, you need some pretty funky things. For instance, you need to have 11 different dimensions. When prior to that, physics was really, comfortable with 5, with the idea that there were perhaps 5 dimensions. But now you have 11 dimensions. And having these 11 dimensions is the only way to make the theory of everything work mathematically. And people say, well, there are a lot of people that are saying, once again, these are just theories. But again, with the theories that we've had, look at the things that we've been able to do. And as I expressed in an earlier program, you really, when you're talking about consciousness, you're really talking about accuracy. When you're talking about, figuring things out, who we are in the world and where we're going, you're talking about relativity, not absolutes. So there are degrees of accuracy. So one of the other concepts that has come up in this in quantum physics, you have string theory and you have M theory. String theory says that the the subatomic particles themselves are made up of even smaller things called strings, which are, variable length vibrating forms of energy that are pretty much made of the same stuff, but determine what is going to physically manifest, what something is going to appear as, based on the vibration of those strings. And I could spend 5 shows talking about string theory, but I'm trying to just give you an overview. But even with the advent of quantum theory and string theory, you still had the holy grail of physics that had not yet been conquered in terms of theory. And that was, where did all of this stuff come from? I mean, you had, basic concurrence on the Big Bang Theory that said that there was this, really tiny, incredibly massive point of energy that exploded and became the universe. And you had all these, the quantum theory and string theory and all of this, but you still didn't have anything to explain where the Big Bang came from. I mean, we have a lot of science that theoretically, mathematically explains that, a millisecond after the Big Bang, what happened, what were the dynamics. Astrophysics also is a science that deals with this very issue. But nobody could figure out, what happened at the very moment of the Big Bang or right before it. And this is the basis of the Large Hadron Collider experiment in Switzerland. They're trying to find a particle that they're calling the Higgs boson that they believe is responsible for turning energy into matter. Now, we've already figured out how to turn matter into energy, and you can ask the Hiroshimans and the Nagasakians about that one. We took an atom and we split it and released this energy. So we were able to transduce the physical and turn it into energy. What we haven't figured out is, how do you get the energy of the universe to become physical matter? And so they think that this is a function of this particle called the Higgs boson, and that's what they're looking for. But even then, you're still talking about what happened at the advent of the Big Bang. You're still not talking about where the Big Bang came from. And that's really what M-theory addressed. And M-theory said that, well, maybe our universe, or maybe is not unique at all, and rather than thinking that the Big Bang is some unique cosmic event that only happened one time and created this universe, that perhaps Big Bangs are relatively routine, and that there are many universes that all perhaps have duplicates of everyone and everything that are manifesting as, one of an infinite number of probabilities, so that anything that could possibly happen is actually happening, but in a parallel universe. But what the membranes theory says is that universes are actually made up of undulating membranes of energy that are really close to each other, and every now and then one membrane will bump into another membrane and explode and create another universe. Now, I mean, this is, to the average person, this has got to sound like science fiction. But these are the things that are being theorized and that are being worked out mathematically. And don't think that everyone agrees with this. You'll have physicists that disagree with specifics of the dynamic and many times major elements of the dynamic. But this is where the science and the mathematics and our observations with empirical experiments, this is where we're being led. Now, one of the things that I believe is one of the most profound and relevant outgrowths of quantum theory and the search for the theory of everything is something called unified field theory. Now, unified field theory, again, Einstein is the guy that came up with this idea of a unified field. And basically what the unified field theory says is, okay, you've got all of this matter spread all over the universe and perhaps other universes, and that all of this matter comprises these tiny particles, these elemental particles. And then you have these fundamental forces that are interacting with these elementary particles that create what we see and what we perceive as reality. Well, what the unified field theory says is that these particles, that the energetics of these particles are actually unified, so that the elementary particles really don't know that they're separate from the other particles, but that these particles enjoy a relationship of unification, so that one particle always knows what the other particle is doing, is always affected by what the other particle is doing, no matter where it is in time and space, and that information is being exchanged between these particles instantaneously at all times and in all places. This is the unified field theory. And if you ask me, that's sort of science stumbling upon the mystery of consciousness, because I believe that that's what consciousness is. It is a connectedness to everything, but it has been perverted. Our consciousness has been controlled. Our consciousness has been seared by a paradigm that supposes that we are separate, that we're not one, that we're not all interrelated and that we're connected, but that we are separate. And this is one of the very terrible side effects, if not design goals, of religion, of a paradigm of separation, of the ideal that we are somehow not a part of the universal order of things, that somehow we are terrible beings, disenfranchised beings, whose whole goal in life is to somehow become connected and then maintain that connection with God so that we don't go to hell, so that we don't spend an eternity of separation from God. What a grossly perverted concept. What a divisive concept. And this idea of separation is used to keep us at each other's throats so that we can't take advantage of the dynamics of that unification to discover and participate in our own creativity. Now, when we start talking about all these forces that science has found, and I apologize, I got on a roll here. My name is Keith David Henry. You're listening to the Community Listening Network, and this is the Progressions of Consciousness radio program. Now, when you get these scientists that are finally, after all these years, they're starting to talk to each other. So you've got the subatomic physicist and the physical physicists, if you will, the guys that are dealing with gravity and the laws of motion and the laws of matter and flow of fluids and all of these different things. And you've got the astrophysicists, and you've got the subatomic physicists, all now collaborating. But you also have something interesting where, even though in large measure these particular areas of science have been going in different directions, they all seem to be coming to the same conclusions about our universe, having been using different mathematics that we can now unify and in search of the theory of everything. So even with Einstein's refinement, for instance, on the theory of gravity, now you have science finding out these weird things, for instance, that Einstein said, and it's generally agreed upon and proven mathematically, that no physical matter can go faster than the speed of light. Yet you have our universe that, while apparently none of the matter within the universe can move faster than the speed of light, that the universe itself is expanding faster than the speed of light. Now, if that's not a brain teaser, I don't know what is. Because if you understand the basis of the Hubble telescope, people are saying, well, what we're doing is we're seeing way out in space. But what's actually happening is light can only travel at 365,000 miles per second. But the universe is billions and billions and billions and billions of miles, light years in size. So that when you see the sun, for instance, you're actually seeing the sun as it appeared about 8 minutes ago, because that's how long it takes the light to travel. But with a telescope, you can look further out into space, so you can see the light before it gets to you. Well, that's what a telescope does. That's what they're doing with the Hubble. They're seeing the light before it gets to us. So in effect, they're seeing back in time as well as back in space. And they're finding that all these dynamics exist that contradict even Einsteinian mathematics and the quantum theory that they've recently come up with. And I'm going to continue this discussion in the next show, but remember, we're talking about the fallacy of separation, and as something that science and physics is seeing is a fallacy, that the idea of separation is at best a misnomer and is actually an illusion. Once again, this is Keith Henry. You're on the Community Listening Network. This is the Progressions of Consciousness radio program. I encourage you to visit my website, www.don'treadthisbook.net, and I will see you next time.